again, you might be listening to this podcast and say, I don't like the policy. I don't get it. I think this is a dumb policy. And maybe you're right. Maybe it is a dumb policy. But God has called you to follow those who are in leadership and those who are in spiritual authority, even when you don't understand, and show respect for that. For those who, will say, I'm not going to fight this policy, but I think it's silly and I'm just ignore it. This disregard can I think, show a real character issue. It can show that our word to mean nothing. If we say, oh yeah, I'm fully behind the policy, but don't really care to follow through on it, I think that speaks to our personal character.
Yeah, and it speaks to issues of authority, like, or submission to authority. We may not like every law in the state or federal books, but we're still bound to keep them. And just like the people that whoever the elected official is, and well, that's not my president or that's not my governor. Like, well, yeah, he is. It doesn't matter if you voted for him or not.
Yeah.
And so I think it speaks to an unwillingness to submit to authority that God has given us.
How is child safety in church a witness to the lost, or is it witness to the lost at all, Ben?
I think so. They can see that we take the safety of our children and of theirs seriously, and it shows love to them. We're talking about showing love to for God, love for the children. It shows love, and that we're thinking about this and taking steps to protect. And it's often said that people are concerned about how their kids are treated and taken care of when they go to a church, that and their money. And so,
yeah.
But there are issues of integrity there. If they think that the church is mishandling finances,
yeah.
That raises eyebrows. And so,
you mean that
I think
visitors might be concerned about the new gold teeth I've been getting?
Yeah, that private jet, But when people see that, I think it does speak, whether they believe fully or not. They recognize, okay, this is a priority, and it models God's character. Jesus cared a great deal for children in a society that was not. The apostles are like, no, Jesus doesn't have time for these kids, and then Jesus takes them up in his lap, touches them, and shows affection. And God, you mentioned that psalm, or I think it was Psalm 146. God is a protector of the weak, and because of that, we should be too.
Yeah, that's good. I'll just say very briefly, while I don't think that child protection policy is the gospel message by any stretch, I think that there's no question that people have been won to the Lord partly through child protection policies that churches took very seriously. That, I've known of people that have visited churches where the gospel is proclaimed clearly, and then they saw that these people care about my kids through having policies that might go out of the way and might be uncomfortable to some of the volunteers, but we're really caring for the kids, and that helped bridge the gap so that they were able to really understand the gospel and see the beauty of how these people are different. And I think there's no question that having a safe environment for kids helps us reach their parents as well as the children. Now, how do we have these important church conversations about child safety? Should we just kind of maybe, take a stapler and staple our child protection policies onto people's foreheads?
That might get their attention. I think you do have to raise awareness, and with a lot of things, you have to communicate it again and again. But having meetings about it, having training sessions, videos can be helpful, and like I was talking about earlier, letting experts talk. And it may require some personal conversations with individuals, but having those kinds of things and letting people hear stories of people that this has happened to, and those kinds of things. Because, I've encountered that both in leadership and just as someone who was working in a children's ministry, volunteering. People kind of like, well, we didn't do it like that when I was younger, and why can't I come back there and hold the babies or something, and just not getting it. And so sometimes you do have to step in and speak like that.
Yeah.
But I think just making it a let people know this is a big priority, and the vision behind it. But yeah, you have to do something. If you don't do that, you need to do something.
That's that's great. I think we need to raise awareness. We have to do something. I'll say that we need to create a culture that more than just singing great songs about child protection policies, we need to be willing to be create a culture where we're able to be uncomfortable for the sake of helping people. And even the culture where even the average member is thinking about child safety. And I want to encourage anyone who's listening to this church that it might be, a member of a church, might be just joining a church, might be perhaps even you're not really able to serve in children's ministry or something else, health reasons or anything like that. You can be part of that culture. You can echo concerns to care for the kids that are in your congregation.
Yeah, that's just it's not just within your area of ministry, but that's great. Just having everybody thinking about it.
Now, how do child care workers and volunteers practice a high view of child safety?
Seeing this as a service to God, and like you were talking about, putting forward a vision for this, and not just doing the not going to do it. See this as service to God and His love for the children. And I've talked a lot about love in this because I think it is a love issue. And trying to see things through that grid. And most of the people who serve are there because they love the Lord and because they love children.
Yeah.
And just bringing that back to their mind and using that as a way to encourage them. And hey, this is why we're doing this. And so the practical outworking of that, whether they fully agree or not or fully see it, it helps put things in perspective.
Yeah. I think it's important that all child care workers and volunteers need to make themselves aware of signs and symptoms of child abuse as a very, very practical step, And in this, actually, I'm encouraging people to look to stuff from their government, not just the Bible in this. Almost every state government has a really great list, if you look very hard, of signs and symptoms of child abuse. And it's something I think is incredibly helpful for every child care volunteer to read their state's signs and symptoms of child abuse online. Almost all of them can be easily found online. And alongside those great and helpful resources that almost every U.S. state has created, follow the policies that exist in your church, and encourage others to do so. When you around the church water cooler and you hear, there's this new policy, but it doesn't really apply to me. I've served for 38 years in the children's ministry, and therefore this isn't for me. Encourage them. This is a service of the Lord, and we have to be faithful in this.
Yeah, no, those are good tips.
So, how can parents value safety and protection of their own children? Is this kind of just a church thing, and that parents don't need to really care about this kind of stuff, Ben?
Some don't. But no, I think just being mindful of where and with whom you leave them. And I think it seems, just from things I hear, that our generation of parents is more tuned into that kind of thing. Some of it's from news and internet and exposure and those kinds of elements that are at play. But it's remembering that it's a stewardship. God has given us a stewardship of human souls, of people who bear His image. And read some, talk to people, and don't just think, well, it won't happen to us. Because, a high percentage of children who, when some sort of abuse takes place, it's not strangers.
Yeah.
It's actually people that they know. And they're not all these, middle-aged, overweight, single guys who haven't showered or shaved in a couple days, and you can, pick them out. They're not always, it's not always obvious from the, lots of research that's been done. And so, but ultimately you've got to trust the Lord with that. God can take care of your children.
Yeah. One very practical resource I want to encourage, Ben talked about a really good resource earlier, a really great little book for parents, especially with preschool-age children. I strongly encourage you to get is God Made All of Me by Justin Holcomb. I think we'll be making it a recommended resource sometime this year at Westminster Baptist Church. I think it's a really helpful little book about the human body and about the need to protect it and privacy and the importance of that to help a child understand, what are things that other people can't have access to? What are things that they are allowed keep safe, and things like even it talks about even how we're not supposed to keep secrets with adults like that. And I think that's a hugely helpful thing that's going to educate your child and keep your child away in a way that's not going to freak them out. I think another very great way, and I think it's honoring of an understanding God's creation, is talk to your kids about body privacy, using objective terms even at a young age. Even some state studies show that children that are confused on proper understanding of their genitals, for example, and even on the proper medical terminology, are more likely to be confused about child abuse. There's even evidences that show that children that use proper medical terms can actually deter by that, just by that alone, deter child abusers from hurting them. And I think also make sure that they know that they can talk to you, and they don't ever have to show affection to someone. If somebody, a really sweet old man in the church is insisting that if they give them a candy, they have to give them a kiss or a hug or whatever. Our kids need to know they don't have to do that. Even if you're a pastor and you feel that you have to meet those expectations, their kids need to understand that reality, that they don't have to ever show affection. They don't even have to show affection to you. Affection is a private thing, and they can never be forced. It can never be forced upon them, because God respects their body and their privacy. And then I think insists on thorough safety policies wherever your children are. And I think for some, if you go to a church that shows no concern, maybe this is something you need to talk to your senior pastor about. Maybe it's something you need to talk to that church leadership about, or perhaps rethink some things for yourself. Make sure that your children are in a school system that really cares about child safety and doesn't disregard it. Make sure that, and wherever they're taken care of, that their safety is not dismissed but taken seriously. If churches don't take children's safety seriously, you should not go to that church.
That's a good point. I mean, yeah, because you can't undo that.
We've talked about child safety. So, Ben, do you think we should all become these helicopter parents that watch over everything that our kids do with with great detail, and make sure that our kids, never get further than a foot away from us?
No, but there is certainly the temptation. Just the more you become aware of things like this, and you're like, man, there are molesters and perverts out there, and I mean, both of us are the fathers of two daughters,
yeah,
and knowing too that the prevalence of pornography, and I don't see that turning around sometimes. And you just what's out there, or at least you get a hint of what's out there. And so there is that temptation, but we have to remember that God loves our kids more than we do. He's able to protect them far better with his power and his wisdom, his knowledge, his goodness, better than we can. And so, I mean, really, we can be showing pride and arrogance if we think that we can protect them from everything, and we shouldn't. But this is an area that we ought to take a lot of effort to protect them from. And some of it's just wisdom, like who they're around. And if there's, you talked about signs and symptoms of child abuse, and then there's other things. There's resources out there from state and federal agencies, and other research that talks about things, warning signs, things to watch out for people. But again, it's not like everybody who's a predator fits a certain profile.
No.
And so, I'm careful with who I leave my children with, and there's people that we know that, my wife and I have both said, like, man, we're not really comfortable if that person's around, leaving the kids. That's just not something we're going to do. And so, but we seek to live wisely and trust the Lord. Ultimately, we can't do it all.
No, we can't. We don't always have to be afraid. It can be easy to see all these things and get scared out of the wazoo. I mean, if you go on a sexual predator registry, sex offender registry, it can be easy to get terrified that a sex offender lives 3 blocks away or something like that. And we need to keep our kids safe from that. But the answer to our fear is trusting.